Now on to our top story and the maternity scandal that is threatening to engulf Nottingham's NHS Trust. Police have today launched an investigation into nearly 2,000 baby deaths and injuries at maternity units in the city. That is the largest ever carried out in the United Kingdom.
Issues at the Trust were first raised by whistleblowers Sarah and Dr. Jack Hawkins, whose baby Harriet was stillborn as a result of a mismanaged labour in 2016. And this week, Sarah tweeted this poignant image with the words, "Harriet should be going to school today. Our beautiful 7-year-old whose life was stolen from us. The empty cries, laughter and shoes. We will forever be proud of Harriet."
Well, Dr. Jack joins us now. Thank you for joining us today. This is bittersweet, I suppose, for you. How are you feeling about this?
Delighted, really. We've been whistleblowing to the right people about the right things for a very, very long time. I think one of the things that we have to recognise is that whilst every other large organisation that we've tried to get help from has required considerable efforts from us, which we'll call fighting, to take us seriously and to take our children's deaths and harms seriously, we didn't have to do that with the police. So that's really welcomed.
And Jack, if you don't mind, and obviously if you feel comfortable sort of talking about it, do you mind taking us back to what actually happened back in 2016 and what first kind of made you realise that something wasn't quite right?
So Sarah was completely fit and well. Harriet was completely fit and well. I'm completely fit and well. We contacted the hospital when Sarah started labour, and there were a few episodes where the care was good enough, but multiple episodes where the care was anything but good enough. But we were reassured, bullied into accepting their advice. You're not in labour, women in labour don't behave like this, all sorts of things, which are the key themes about the maternity failures in Nottingham. Massive doses of opiates and sent home, told that we could be readmitted just with a phone call. We made that phone call and they said it doesn't work like that, and redid everything on the phone and told us a different story, said stay home. Eventually, when they took us seriously, we got into hospital. It was an emergency, but they treated it as if it wasn't, admitted us to birth sanctuary, repeatedly scanned Sarah's tummy until they eventually realised that her bladder was full, which they drained, and then turned and said, "I'm sorry, your baby's dead."
Oh my goodness.
6 pounds, 12 ounces, full term, nothing wrong with her at all. And at that point, at that instant, apart from just the ground swallowing us up, we recognised that things had gone wrong, and we started blowing the whistle from that point.
So you said sometimes the care was good enough and sometimes it was not good enough. Can you just outline that care, just in terms of how you felt it wasn't good enough, what they did, what they didn't do? Also, one other question I have for you. Did you actually know lines of command? Did people take responsibility for the decisions they made?
I'll answer that one first. No one has taken responsibility. Our apologies from them, they've changed recently, but our apologies at the time were repeatedly, we reiterate our condolences. You know, it's like they knocked our dog over or something. Yeah, so well, there was a proper investigation eventually done by another hospital into the care we received, which highlighted 13 significant failures and said that her death was almost certainly avoidable. Up until that point, the hospital had been trying to convince us that she died from an infection, but there was no infection. And that's not me guessing, that's the post-mortem report. The microbiology and virology said there is no infection here. So when they were doing that to us, I'm an acute medicine consultant. Probably 50% of what I do is infections, pneumonias and cellulitis and so on. There was nothing about this that made that true. And we recognised if they were doing that to us, and they didn't just do it once, they didn't say, oh, actually, we've made a mistake. It went up the chain of command until eventually the board were writing to us saying, this is an infection. And it's just truly horrific, and it's why we have this massive review needed.
Yes, and as an acute medicine consultant, and I understand this as a fellow medic, when things go wrong, you would think that we are in a privileged position where we know things, where we get stuff done and we get answers. But that is often not the case, is it?
But we got stuff done and we got answers, but we got it almost at the cost of our own lives. Such dark times of trying to convince colleagues that they had made a mistake. And again, bringing it back to why there's so many, one of the things in your diagnostic tree has to be, was this us? And I think this is something that the Nottingham Maternity Department is still struggling with. We know of a number of people whose babies are alive and clearly have birth injuries, and they're being referred for month-long genetics testing. Anything that they can do but say, do you know what, this is a birth injury.
And Jack, can I ask how you and Sarah, did you reach out to other families who'd been affected in a similar way? How did you first make that kind of connection?
Well, it was difficult. We recognised that things were really bad. And I think we were first on national TV in 2017, though, with, frankly, a lot less power and with a slightly different angle to the story. We recognised with our solicitor and PR agent that we would have to get more people. We were just a lone voice, and we thought of all sorts of different ways of doing that whilst broken beyond belief. And being called an isolated, tragic incident, along with many other people. I think in about 2019, we met the Andrews family, whose daughter, Winter, died in what they recognised and called us about was a copy and paste of what happened to Harriet, except that Winter just survived. I think we got up to about 10 families, and then all of a sudden it snowballed, and we've now got, I don't know, 220 or something in our Facebook group, all of whom describe horrific care and horrific attempts to not recognise that it was poor care, terrible letters being written to them, all sorts. It's why we have this, it's why we're here.
And so poor maternity care seems to be a recurrent theme. Also, this culture of cover-up, which we hear about a great deal in these institutions. You work in these hospitals. Why does that culture of cover-up still persist?
I don't know, and I think that's a question for the independent review and for the police, really. We are very clear that there's been a cover-up. People knew, we knew how to navigate the system. So the hospital board knew, the clinical team knew, NHS England knew, NHS Improvement at the time knew, the CQC knew, the General Medical Council knew, the Nursing and Midwifery Council knew, and none of these people have, to our minds, taken appropriate action. Nobody is accountable. We think that's a big deal. We are accountable for not speeding on the motorway, and if you do speed, then there will be sanction. It appears that in Nottingham you can cause horrific harm to families, and there is nothing. All the people involved in Sarah's care are still working.
Jack, there was a report out earlier this year that stated that we spend in the UK £8.2 billion in maternity payouts for negligence, and yet we only invest £3 billion into maternity care. It's such a vast difference. If only more money was spent on maternity, which is ultimately, you know, women's health, I suppose, is the umbrella term for it. And so many women, I think, will be watching this and will have felt like they've come forward to a doctor about certain things in the past and simply were not believed. Is that something that Sarah, well, you've just said, you know, it was something that Sarah experienced during her birthing experience?
Yeah, just not believed. I always take I'm slightly concerned when we call it a resourcing issue. I think that you could give, certainly the old team, I think they are trying to make changes, but I think you could give them another 100 staff a day, and because of their culture, they wouldn't necessarily be any better.
And of course, we've seen this in other hospitals, haven't we? We've seen similar things in West Mercia. We've seen things at mid-staffs. I've heard so many stories about this, where there aren't enough staff, no one has accountability, there's a culture of cover-up, and no one seems to take the rap for what goes on.
Well, that's why the police need to be involved.
Yeah.
Like I say, we are very clear that we blew the whistle about poor care. We used the phrase in 2016, you're conducting a cover-up, you're behaving like mid-staffs, and you wouldn't know if you had Beverly Allett working for you. And that is repeated. I think we've sent you some of those letters to your team, the whistleblowing letters. They're so clear, and yet they were frankly ignored. So here we are, and we think that there will be a lot of harmed families, dead babies, harmed babies, because we were ignored.
Yeah.
And just in terms of this, it's the largest inquiry, 1,800 people involved in this. It's an enormous undertaking. But also, just in terms of that, and hopefully when the inquiry actually finds what has been going on and getting to the bottom of what's been going on, will that be closure for you?
It's interesting. Closure doesn't exist when you've got an avoidably dead child. What we want is some accountability and justice, and that might be that there is no one to answer for anything. It was all above board, but we don't believe that. But we want to see change. And we heard the other day when we're on the news at the midwifery handover on Labour Suite, we are the problem, Sarah and I.
Wow.
They talk badly about us, and that is now. So, yeah, it needs to change. And if this is another lever to make it change, the police are involved. They don't get involved for no reason. So if you work at NUH, recognise the police are involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's, I just want to commend everything that yourself and Sarah are doing. Obviously, send our love and condolences to you both, and also just really hope that you get that justice and accountability that you so much deserve. Thank you so much, Jack Hawkins there.
Yeah, I mean, yet again, we story after story, multiple failings, lack of accountability. I've heard this story so many times, repeated across hospital trusts. And until this is gripped, and I'm angry about this because I have personal experience of this, where you see doctors cover up mistakes, and I can say this because it's true, where I attended a particular sort of session where I could see that the medics covered up what they were doing. We knew the notes had disappeared and so on. And so until you have faith in the system, nothing will change.
We're seeing it so repeatedly, like you say. If you can't trust the police, and that, constantly we're being told that there's cover-ups within particularly the Metropolitan Police Force, and we can't trust nurses and the people who are supposed to be looking after our babies at their most vulnerable. It says so much to what a sorry state the country's in at the moment. But I hope that there is hope.
Yeah.
And that Jack and Sarah in particular and those other families get that justice, because it's what
and I think they're incredibly brave, actually, to relive the whole thing.
And to be told that they're the problem.
I know.
Repeatedly.
I've heard it so many times.
Yeah, I bet.
So many times.